But let's go and have a look at the actual like Lighthouse scoring. If you go back to the calculator screen, if you change the versions here, like 6 and 7, and go to V5 or show all actually, because this is kind of interesting. I think a lot of, like we talked in the last seminar about the new Web Vital scoring that Google introduced. That's 3 new metrics. So basically what they did was they removed first CPU idle, and they removed first meaningful paint, and they replaced them with total blocking time and largest contentful paint. And then they added cumulative layout shift. If you look at the weighting for these, that's also changed between the versions. So basically they've downplayed all the old metrics, and then the ones that they've added, they consist of like 55% of your score. So if your score changed from V5 to V6, that's not weird because it's 55% new metrics. And the new weighting that Google introduced is kind of heavily leaning into user perceived performance. The metrics they removed, they felt was too technical, and the idea with the new scores is that it should feel like it's a high quality user experience. So they try to always introduce metrics that are supposed to show what a user experiences. But basically, like the trend of Google scoring is that we're moving away from just serving resources as fast as possible to serving the relevant resources as fast as possible. Yeah, and this is a table I just put up to show the weighting and the new scores for V6 and 7, just to think about it for myself. But I think it shows the trend pretty clearly, what they're moving into. So let's have a look at the current V6 and 7. Like let's go into each and every one of these scores and just go through what they actually mean. So if you go into first contentful paint, this is 15% of your score. If you go to Lighthouse calculator, you can see the kind of circle diagram on the left. If you increase and if you pull the metric score meter for any score, you can see that it kind of this is a part of the total score. So if you pull it down, if you have all at 100, and then you pull this one down, since it's 15% weighting, you should kind of remove 15% of the score, the total score. So if you put it metric score to 0, it should be 85. You can pull the metric score slide. Oh, maybe you can't pull it below 5. Okay. Anyway, it should be 85 if you could pull it all the way down. And let's head back to the first contentful paint page that you pulled up. The last. So basically, if you run a test, you will see this screen. The metrics will be explained slightly, and there's a learn more link. It will lead you to this page actually. And what first contentful paints means is it will measure the first time you render anything in the browser that is not like a blank element. So it will measure when the browser has received an answer from a server, when it's interpreted the CSS, and when it starts to render the first content that you might see.
How is content defined?
Yeah, it's defined as images, non-white canvas elements, and SVGs on your page, kind of, or text. So not just like blank divs or background colors. There needs to be something more than that. And the scoring table for this first contentful paint is like between 0 and 2 seconds is good. So that's 75 to 100 points. I think 100 score is at 1.3 seconds ish. And the average, like a pretty normal, well optimized page will have like 2.3 or 5 here. It's kind of hard to get lower than that. And then between 2 and 4 seconds is average, and bad is over 4 seconds for first contentful paint. This is 15% of the score. And some other metrics start measuring after first contentful paint. So it also affects, like indirectly affects other timings.
And one question there is if you go to this score, where would you say that the server response time appears if you have a slow server response time? Because I think maybe that's one of the criticisms of Lighthouse, that it you can have a pretty, if you add a half a second to the server response time, the user would definitely feel that in the navigation, but it doesn't necessarily pop up in these numbers super bad.
No,
Would
but
it be in the first
does.
contentful paint, or would it be somewhere else?
No, it will be in most of these numbers, not all of them.
Okay.
But most of these, I mean, this largest contentful paint, it involves, or it includes, server response time. So if you would have a high server response, it would push largest or first contentful paint. I tried to sort them in order when I go through them, and also kind of based on how big part of your score there is. So the next one I have is largest contentful paint, and that's a new metric. So this is 25% of your score. It's a new, like, part of the Web Vitals rollout, user-centric metric. So the largest contentful paint metric is the render time of the largest image or text block visible in the viewport for a user. So it's important for measuring perceived load speed, because it marks the point where the page load time, where the content is most likely loaded. So Google says here that based on real website data, top performing sites render LCP in about 1.2 seconds. So they mapped that to a score of 99. That's not true, though, I've found by just playing around with the scoring calculator. It seems like 100 score is at 1.5 seconds. But if you're in the green, you have 2.5 seconds to be in good numbers here. All right. So let's move on to speed index. It's the next scoring. This is 15% of your score. Speed index measures how quickly content is visually displayed during page load. And it's measured by Lighthouse capturing a video and then trying to calculate the visual progression between frames. So if you yeah, you can see these screens. That's part of a video. If you run the tests locally, you can save the video of the rendering, and you can also, like, they use something called speedline to try to figure out the visual progression, and it's a bit, these scores are like both speed index and Larry's contentful paint are both like visual metrics where Google tries to kind of identify what's showing, and they try to look at contrast and see how it affects your page when it's loading. And it's, I think they still have kind of a big margin of error here. I mean, they are using scripts to try to figure out what's happening in a page load, and it might not always represent the actual user experience. But what speed index is meant to tell you is like when can you start reading, like even if you don't have images, when can you start reading the text? So it's super important to have readable text for speed index, but your images and other kind of not as relevant content doesn't have to be showing. But it's important that you maintain contrast and your images still take all the space that they should take. If you have a text on top of an image, for example, if you have a white text on a dark image, and then as you render, you don't give a background color to the image before it's showing, that will push your speed index up to be the same kind of as the largest contentful paint. And for 100 score in speed index, you need like just below 2 seconds. But this also, speed index, I think it starts measuring no, it starts measuring from the request. So you have 4.3 seconds for a 75 score. And then for a poor score, it's over 5.8 seconds. Next metric is total blocking time. It's 25% of your score. It measures when, like, for how long a page is blocked from interaction. So where times where you can't click anything or tap the screen or scroll. And it's calculated by adding blocking portions of all long tasks between first contentful paint and time to interactive. Any tasks that execute for more than 50 milliseconds is a long task. So the amount of time after 50 milliseconds here will be added together into the total blocking time. So for if Lighthouse detects a tasks in JavaScript that takes 70 milliseconds, everything above 50 milliseconds of that, so 20, would be added to total blocking time. And for 100 score here, I think, can you double check the score calculator? I think you need below 130 for 100 score.
Yeah. What is causing blocking? Is it JavaScript processing or waiting for external resources like styling and fonts and script?
It's usually long JavaScript tasks. Like a common, if you're on a platform that's built on the front end using jQuery, for example, that like a super common way of doing all event bindings and everything is to wait for the document ready event. If you bind all the logic you have on DOM ready on every page load, there's a lot of logic that needs to execute that will usually turn into a long task, and it will add to your blocking time. So Google is trying to tell us to only execute logic that is necessary for whatever context the user is in right now. So a way of reducing this, if you have high blocking time, would be to look at how you're binding your events, and also look at third-party JavaScripts are usually pretty good at adding total blocking time.
Yeah, we have a question about that later. We have multiple interesting questions, so I'll let you wrap up, but there's some really interesting conversations we will have in the QA session, I believe.
Yeah. All right, I'll just go through there's 2 more scores. So basically, next one is time to interactive. That's 15% of your score. So time to interactive is, if you remember the last score, it measures until time to interactive, and it's the amount of time it takes for the page to become fully interactive. It's become important because since Google's measurements before they introduced time to interactive was a lot about like visual progression of the page. So the optimizations that people did then was, okay, we only need to make things look right. We don't need to bind our JavaScripts or make anything work. We can push that until later, because then we will render faster. So Google introduced time to interactive to kind of measure how long time it takes for the page to actually work as intended. So what they say is, a page is considered fully interactive when the page displays useful content, which is measured by first contentful paint. Event handlers are registered for most visible page element, and the page responds to user interaction within 50 milliseconds. 100 score for time to interactive is like 1.9-ish seconds, 940, I think.
Isn't this typically a number that's usually very high on websites? It can go well into the 10th or 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, it can. It doesn't have to be, but it can be really high, especially on certain platforms that kind of have older architecture. It's hard to get around that. And then the last score, I think that it might be the hardest one to understand, the cumulative layout shift score. It's only 5% of the score right now, and I think that's because it would punish a lot of sites if they weighted it any higher. But basically, cumulative layout shift, it means they measure the sum of all the layout shifts during a page load, and in extension, it says that the score should be like all layout shifts during a visit to a page. But since Lighthouse only measures the loading part, that's also probably why it's such a small percentage of your total score. But what they try to do is they try to look at the page render, and then when they see layout shifts, they try to figure out if it's an expected or unexpected shift. So basically, if you load a page and then you put up a newsletter sign up without any user interaction, that's an unexpected layout shift, and it will be quite a big percentage of the visible content that changes. So your layout shift score will be high, which is bad. You want a low layout shift. Like the best thing you can have is a zero in layout shift.
And I think that's a good, I think essentially does the page jump around as it's loading? I think is the best description of this measure.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you want to test this on your own site, head into the network tab and kind of you can throttle your connection and processor, and you will see this super clearly if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like this is a way of Google promoting expected layout shifts as well, because they say if you use animation in when these layout shifts happens, it can, like, they are not considered unexpected if you use animations well. If you pull up a pop-up, or if you open a menu or something like that, it shouldn't be surprising the user. I think that's the measurement. And that's also what's hard about a lot of these user perceived scores, is that it could be easy to kind of evaluate yourself if something is expected or not. But it's kind of hard to build a testing tool that will reliably decide if something is expected or unexpected.
They should throw some AI in there to fix it.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, so that's all the scores in a bit more detail.
Before we get into questions, do you have any sort of opinions on the score, like criticisms or strengths or weaknesses? I think you've been into some weaknesses right now.
I think Google is moving in a really good direction with trying to not just measure how fast you can deliver resources, but they are trying to measure the user experience quality. And while I think that's really good, they're not getting all the metric tests right. So it's not really fair to a lot of sites that have really well optimized like or good user experiences. It might, like Google's testings or test tool might not really show that.
Yeah, and that's one of the first questions we had. Sort of, would you say there's sort of a difference between perceived performance and actual performance? Like, can you have a bad number here and still have a very, very good website?
I think that's fully possible.
Yeah. There was one that was mentioned is the Sparship website. You can see I click now, it's blazingly fast. But if you let's see what kind of numbers it gets. Yeah, it had a pop-ups. That's unexpected layout shift right there. But let's see what this website gets in terms of scoring. It was mentioned as a reference that it's a very, very fast website that doesn't get it gets a 33 score here, and it gets, and also again, I'm using desktop here as a measurement. We are using the mobile because the vast majority of users are mobile. I think the best, again, this is not simulating a mobile, or does it, Daniel? If I do
well, it does now, because it says Moto G4 on your emulation.
So this one was emulating a mobile user experience, and you have a different experience there whether you visit here. But this is a good example where you.
So let's look at that Lighthouse test that you ran. It says 33 in performance.
Should I go into this calculator?
Yeah.
Or.
Exactly. I mean, this might feel good, but it's also like when you do this kind of testing, you're on a mobile. No, you're on a desktop computer. We're not throttling anything, and we have a really good connection. So that it's, I would say most sites today will perform well on a desktop site or on a desktop computer with a good connection. So that's not really what you want to test. The experience here, like the score tells us that the experience here will be much worse on a low-end device. So what you could do in your other tab where you have this page, if you go
so
into,
you get an 88% score on desktop and you get a 33 on mobile.
Yeah.
So essentially, yes, this website is super fast if you're on a desktop computer, but it doesn't seem to translate into.
But if you go into the tab, you have this page open. That one and go to network, and then you have a drop downs that says online. So say slow 3G instead.
Yeah.
And then disable cache. On that, there's a checkbox there. we're doing a couple of things. So hold on, and then go to performance. You should, okay. I should be able to throttle the processor here, but it might be an extra setting. But I think this is good enough if you pull it up on mobile again, not desktop, like that, and then re-render this page.
Should I do hard?
Yeah, you have disabled cache now, so it should be fine. But this is the experience that someone will have of this page on a slow connection on a decent device. So you can see the imagery is really slow loading. It's not really rendering the image, like any placeholder where the image should show up, and it takes quite a lot of time for the page to be fully seen as it should. That's why you're getting a low score here, because
And
it's
it's a
not
very good, because I agree. As first glance, if you click the link, get a blazingly fast website. So I think it's, yes, this is a super good score on desktop, and that's also reflected in the Lighthouse score. This is a very impressive number. Yeah, these are really impressive numbers. So I mean, and one thing I would like to add, that I there's you mentioned the HTTP archive tool. I have it in here. So there's a big repository, a database of available random crawlings of websites, and we pulled out the score for all the .se domains, and it was like 34,500 or something. And if you do the 50% mark, you can see that you're better than roughly 75% of all websites. So as the score increases, if you get to the 88 score that Sparship has on desktop, they are incredibly fast and better than most. So I think it's a good example of a website that is really fast on desktop, but on a slow connection, it doesn't. We have another request. We should live stream testing of Lighthouse score, Daniel. We have Skylt Dax is another example. Let's get into that one in a second.
so.
Okay,
yeah. I saw another question that I think was
start. I'll do some tests in the meantime.
I think I saw something like asking if I should look at the field or the lab data.
Yeah, that was
the
a question.
PageSpeed Insights.
Yeah.
Like if you want to know how.
What is that referring to? What is the field or lab data?
So the lab data is Google's doing the tests on their own simulated devices. So that's how you get the lab score. But the field data is actual users to your site.
Can you see that somewhere in this?
If you go to that's from the PageSpeed Insights. So basically the field data here is the distribution of your visitors.
You mean that 19% of the users, even though you have a super strong number here, you have 79% have a good or bad experience.
Yeah, and this will tell you this distribution of. Yeah, it doesn't have all the headlines, but it's a really good. It's really good to look at, to just see, like if your optimizations are doing anything for your visitors. Because if you optimize desktop and you don't have any desktop visitors, your field data numbers won't improve, for example.
Yeah.
So if you get your own tests, you're showing that I'm improving across the board in all the tests, and then the field data doesn't move, then it's because your visitors are using maybe low-end devices or on bad connections. So lab data is really useful to see.
What does this one mean? There's some comments here on over the 28-day collection period, the aggregate experience of all pages did not pass the Google Web Vital Assessment. What does it mean? Do you know that?
I haven't seen that before.
No, actually. It's the first time I see it as well. Yeah. Do I have a question here? How would you explain the big gap between the field data versus label data? For example, 2-second LCP versus 16.5. I need to go back, right?
Yeah, I mean that would be kind of what we just looked at. If we throttled our tests we did on this site to like a slow 3G connection, and the lab data will be a fair 4G connection. So if your visitors are on really bad connections and you have big images, for example, that could decrease the score by a lot.
Let's look into this one. The Schiltax, it has a 68% desktop score and it's 37% mobile score. Very low shift. That's good. Anything that stands out in this one?
I think, let's see. I mean, all of these opportunities are always really good numbers to look at. There's render blocking resources that will push the time like the browser needs to think before it can paint your site. So what you can do about these render blocking resources is you can tell the browsers earlier that you need all of these resources before you are able to paint, and you can do that by adding references earlier. You can send it with the request from the server to the browser and say you need all of these resources. But a lot of the time why you get worse scores on mobile than desktop is because you're not doing like with images. If you like, you're not lazy loading images, you're not serving smaller images for smaller devices, and you're not kind of, you need to disconnect kind of the area where an image should appear. You need to render it in place. So either you set the size of the image so that it always consumes the right amount of space on page, so it doesn't cause a layout shift. I mean, a lot of the new measurements measure kind of the same things. So a lot of these affect multiple of the metrics.
I'm looking through a few questions here. We adapted versus responsive. I think we addressed that question, right? Versus a responsive website versus a dedicated mobile. It used to be more of a difference. Now, if you just do it in a bad way, you can still have a big difference between mobile and desktop. But if you do it well, you can tell the browser to only access the resources they need. So responsive works. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary.
Oh, thank you. And also, I think one question, I think this is do we know of any data that points towards speed having an impact on revenue, on conversion? I haven't come across any numbers myself. Have you?
Google has some landing page that they call, I don't remember what it's called, where they convert like performance metrics into revenue somehow. I don't know what they base that on, but that's the only where I've seen it.
Yeah, it would. You know what? It would be really cool. We should develop a scoring calculator where you have like different factors performing conversion, like speed, exciting content, ease of use for e-commerce. That should be our next goal. Okay, what else? External scripts, analytics, Google Tag Manager, Hotjar, social networks can have response on page speed. I think this was the big takeaway from the first webinar we did. That what typically happens is you're buying a web chat. You talk to a salesperson and say, listen, it's super easy to integrate. It's just a couple of lines of code. And that typically means that you just add a JavaScript to the page. It adds blocking time, it adds resources. Can you go into that a little bit on how this affects?
Yeah, I mean, adding the wrong third-party script might even if you optimized everything on your end, if you had one bad third-party script, that might totally ruin your site performance. So I think you need to try to make sure that your third-party tools are also well performing. And I think that's something that third parties, they've never been used to having to kind of optimize. Time to market is mostly important for them. And then when they built their product, they haven't really optimized a lot. We're seeing some of the big third party tools that we use, at least, starting to take this seriously and releasing versions that are better optimized. But that's also because we've asked them to. And I think all of us needs to bring it up. All merchants that use third-party tools, we need to ask them about performance. We need to say that we can't use it if they're ruining our web pages.
I think one of those examples that we work with a lot is if you need to do user reviews to help drive conversions, you typically want to push products with high review rate, but all of these stars are generated by JavaScripts, and it's sort of the third-party tools are analyzing our DOM trees and a lot of listeners, and it's injecting and changing the DOM tree significantly, especially the more reviews you collect. And these kind of, if you have multiple tools like these, they all sort of pull you down a little bit, right?
Yeah, if I mean, it can be done in good and bad ways. In this case, we've had problems with a third party that don't do things well.
Yeah.
And we're pushing them to change their tools.
And I've seen some companies generate like images of these, others sort of rewrite the JavaScripts altogether. There's another question here. How reliable are the opportunities mentioned here? I think you told me once that it's very simple to get good performance. Just do what Google tells you to do and you will have good performance. Is that true?
Mostly, that's true. I mean, the opportunities, they will vary in complexity. Like if preloading these key requests, like you can't do it on all platforms, but usually you should be able to. But there might be some of these opportunities might be really hard to implement because it requires you to change a lot of the platform. But most of them are fairly easy, and there's a lot of ways to do them. That's why Google brand them as opportunities.
Yeah.
And the estimated savings, that's kind of a worst case estimated saving.
Yeah. And preloading, can you explain what that does?
Basically, if you have a resource like a CSS file, it will be placed in the head of your page. And as a browser receives the HTML page from a server, it needs to interpret the document. So it will start reading line by line. And when it reaches the CSS link, it will say, okay, I need this CSS file to render the rest of the document. So it will fetch it, and then it will interpret it, and then it will render the remaining part.
So I mean, in this case, we're stumbling into three different CSS, and we'll not continue to do anything before any of these are loaded, and also the JavaScript, right?
Well, we're saying here that all of these are not for all screens, so it won't load the print or the min-width 768 one.
Yeah.
But
so this one is required.
It will fetch the style for mobile. But basically what preloading does is we're telling the browser before line 13, if you add a link as high on the page as possible, you can get the browser to already download this file.
Yeah.
It will just have to interpret it. And that makes it a lot faster, and it makes it, in the Google tests, it will mark the resource as non-blocking.
And there's
but
another
even
question.
Better than the link header, you can add it as a header on your server. So it will actually send the preload link with the response. without having to interpret the document itself.
Yeah. And that's how you shave the last 10th of seconds or milliseconds to in these measurements.
But the preloads make a huge difference in score.
There's a question about CDN solutions. Would those improve the results in general?
They should. They usually, I mean, a lot of the times when we're using CDNs and doing like tests locally, since we are in Sweden and we usually have Swedish located servers, and then if we use like an international CDN, we might get worse scores. Because it's not about just catering to ourselves. It's about the lab data. The lab, I mean, the real users should be served the resources faster from a CDN because it can be closer to our users, but you might not see a huge difference in your own tests.
Yeah, it would show up in the field in Google's aggregated data over the overall experience, but not in the test you're running. Yeah,
and there are some CDN solutions that offers like image optimization and things like that, and that could improve your score more so than just serving files faster.
It's more a quick and easy way to serve better images or media.
Yeah.
Okay, another question, maybe the last one, is sort of any insight, quantified insights on speed relevance for SEO. It's sort of like the conversion question. It's super interesting because I think that these web vitals are factored into the Google search engine optimization rankings, but I haven't seen any quantified numbers. Have you?
No, not really, but it should be kind of the numbers we're seeing here. The lab data for your site should be what Google uses to rank you. Well, not the lab data, sorry, the field data. I don't know that they pushed this into the rankings yet or how they're weighing it, but what they were saying when they released the Web Vitals initiative is that those were the metrics they will use across the board.
There is another question. Is there any difference between adding in URL to run a test or visit a page and then run a test? Like, do you need to clear a cache? My assumption is that all page insights and these tests are always running, assuming no cache, or how would it work?
Yeah, when you run tests, it will always be on a clear cache with no cookies.
Yeah, because you had an you had a clear cache. Is this needed when you make the run tests?
No, not when you run tests. Just I've clicked it just to show.
Okay.
When we tested in the browser, but tests that you run through Lighthouse will always clear your cache. And that's also a good point for lab data. No, sorry, field data, because field data is not only one visitor and one page load. It's one visitor, several page loads.
Okay. Cool. Google fonts made the web look nice, but it also made it heavier. Is it a true statement?
Somewhat, but there's new font include properties you should use for using web fonts, so you always have a fallback. I mean, fallbacks are old, but there's a property called font display that you can add to your Google fonts includes, so that it adds font display swap, and that means that it will render with whatever your fallback font is until this is the Google fonts file is served. That also makes a huge difference in a lot of these metrics.
I have another one here on the topic of integration to third party. Would the recommendation be to go with like more? Do you want to bundle more features into the same platform? Like take Nosto is a third party product recommendation. Would you prefer having an in-platform product recommendation to reduce the reliance on third party scripts in general, or is it not important? But essentially, do you want to? Is there an upside to limit the number of third parties you bring into an application?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's a really hard question to generalize, because it will always just depend on the actual product and implementation. But there could be an idea, because a lot of the third parties, they bundle all the scripts you need for all of their services, even if you just use one of them. So there could be an idea to go with some bundled services instead of just one per vendor.
Maybe also more important is that you actually have control of what is happening on your website.
Yeah.
We discussed when to optimize these reviews, for instance. I think one of the was maybe we should rewrite the library that integrates with the third party, so we get more control over how it integrates instead of waiting for them to optimize, because typically these companies are driven more by acquiring new clients, so it's not typically top priority with performance.
Yeah, but I would say like the best thing you can do when integrating new third parties is test it, like run tests just to see how it affects your page speed.
I think this table was very aligning when we saw it the first time. Sort of what is the impact of web chats on your performance. You can see Zendesk is maybe one of the most popular, has one of the highest impacts on user experience, at least at the time of writing. Maybe this has changed since, but it's still. Okay, anything else to add, Daniel? I think we have addressed. Maria, do you think we missed any questions? Yeah, sorry, Maria. Go on.
No, we just got a last question.
Yeah, I saw it. It's a pretty good one because we've been discussing it internally.
Yeah, they have an option to push the loading of their framework somewhat. I don't remember what it's called, but there's a setting you can do in Zendesk that makes it a bit less of a performance impact. It's still not very good, but there's some kind of option that you can enable. I don't remember the exact name of that.
Yeah. I would. I think my last comment would be. I keep getting back to this one. This is a chart of the Swedish websites available, and if you, I put them down to. If you had a poor, what was the grading? It's good. How would you grade red, orange?
It's good, needs improvement, and poor.
And poor means that you are in Swedish. In Sweden, if you have below 50, if you have 50, you're better than 74% of all websites, but it's still considered poor by Google. And it's sort of a little bit annoying because it's virtually impossible for everybody to be above 50 because it's a relative score to some extent, and at least always will be as a review how they're doing it. But I think I was annoyed by this for a long time, and I always lost the argument when I was talking to especially clients. Listen, our score is bad. It's only 25. We need better scores. I said, yes, maybe you do. But if you have 30, you're better than 50% of the scores in Sweden. So for me, it sort of clicked when we need to benchmark to our competition. That's the entire point of the top list. We need to benchmark within e-commerce because these numbers are what they are. And I think the Sparship example is a great one where yeah, it's super fast, but also, and we got some feedback on said, yeah, but when test on 4G, it's better. Yeah, but also it doesn't cost you anything to advance on the other aspects because it's never, you can probably have a pretty decent experience with a bad number. I know a lot of companies, I mean, I think H&M is around 10 or something. It's a pretty bad number, but I don't think people would argue that H&M is suffering in their e-commerce. They probably can do better. So there's a lot of factors going into e-commerce.
And then it will depend on your visitors. Like optimization is mostly about improving the experience for like low-end devices on bad connections. That's where you'll see the biggest difference in like perceived speeds and quality.
Yeah, is that also maybe why companies like HM, the global brands, because Apotea is for sure a Swedish brand, so a pretty small sample size from the world, but H&M will have a much broader sample size. Would that play into the numbers you get, or wouldn't it matter at all?
Sorry, I zoned out. I was reading a question.
No,
that I thought was really, or it wasn't a question, but Frederick says, I guess another aspect is that you're actually competing against any type of websites with these scores while running an e-commerce site, which is one of the most complex and heavy websites.
Yeah. Is that true?
That is true. I mean, since they're measuring available content on the web, you're not relatively comparing to other e-commerce sites.
We have another question here. Any signs of e-commerce worldwide shifting to static site generators?
Not really, that I've seen at least. I mean, we maybe thought we would see more PWAs in e-commerce, but that trend is really slow yet. And we don't see any static site generators just yet either. Maybe some super big brands or something have something like that, but I haven't really seen any open source alternative that does that.
I think one metric we might bring into this score in the future, we actually started tracking it in February, but we don't know how reliable it is yet, is an uptime metric. It doesn't really matter how fast your website is if it's down now and then. So we started doing it, and to bring it in like a downtime between maybe 5 in the morning and 1 in the morning. Like the extended day could be a metric to bring in. So I think there's more than just this, but this is the number everybody relates to. I think everybody, I can work with like a top level CEO, and they know barely anything about e-commerce, but they know that they want a fast website, and sort of defining what fast means, I think has been important for us and for me. And I think there's no way of ducking away from this number. This is a number you need to relate to. And if you understand it, you can build for it. And if you build for it, you get to pretty good numbers. And then we have to understand that these, I mean, there will probably be version 8 of Lighthouse eventually. And that would shift the formula. So we had some really impressive, we had a website that was averaging like 70 in last spring. And then when they updated the formulas, it went down to 40 or 50. And that's still a very good number, but it's also means that you need to keep your eye on the horizon and not just chase the numbers. But these numbers are probably, if you have good numbers, probably did something right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have anything else. Do you, Daniel?
Or just a comment on that. Shifts from V6 and 5 to 6. Like a lot of people dropped their performance score by the new metrics. Like one of them is the first or biggest contentful paint, which tries to measure the biggest element rendered on your screen. And you can, there are some ways to solve that with content. You could only render text in the in the first view on any device, and that would give you a really good score. But it would probably also make for a worse user experience. So I mean, there's still ways of kind of cheating Google to get a good score, but it will not reflect maybe the quality or the experience of the user.
Yeah. Do you have any good monitoring solutions for Lighthouse score to be able to follow changes over time? Yeah. No. Yes and no. We started using the Bugbear. It looks really nice because you can track. We track some tools in here for multiple websites over time. These numbers are off. They're not true. It's like you take Urban Years as a company we measure. We know that these numbers do not. They're good for relative numbers, but they're not good for objective, because this number doesn't reflect what you see in the API, and they don't reflect what you see in the local test either. And my biggest complaint was the desktop numbers were not super reliable. Anyhow, it's still a very good tool, because you can, if you go to, in this case, the start page, you can follow it over time. If you have the, you can see our things we're doing having effect. So before and after launch, these tools are typically quite good to measure. So you can measure the Lighthouse numbers in here, but also you can measure more than Lighthouse. You can get, I think we have page weight should be here somewhere. Maybe it's the overview. Yeah, a weight. So it loads 6. Yeah, it's a pretty good load weight. But if someone uploads new super huge images, banners, that happens always in every company we work with. People make a mistake, and then you can have this system to alert you. So that's a way. Do you have any? Speed curve is another tool. We haven't been. I think it's more reliable than, but we're not using that one.
I will send a link in the chat with. It's from the Lighthouse repository on GitHub. It's a list of of services that integrate Lighthouse. All of them are not for monitoring. Some of them are for other things, but I mean, that should probably update if more services add Lighthouse integrations.
Yeah. Component rush into better website might be indicated this isn't affecting conversion. Yeah, I think. I mean, again, performance is a question that everybody talks about. It's almost like an emotional trigger to talk about performance, and it's the only one of the only sort of people that are far away from e-commerce and technology running a company. They still understand conversion and they understand performance. So I think these are the two metrics like the lesser knowledgeable people in our organization understands. So it's hard to get around it. I don't know what first contentful paint means, but I know that I want a fast website and things like that. But we also had with certain companies like super high level meetings about performance because it's crushing our sales. And then eventually something happens and the company takes off and the website didn't change, but sales are doubling or quadrupling. So apparently it wasn't just about performance, but it's, I also think it's not an excuse to not do it. I think we, but I would like for us to get some more research into quantifiable relationships between performance and search engine optimization and conversion. That has to be some research in that field. A tip to monitoring time to first byte. I see 95th, 99th percentile, not just averages. Do you understand that question?
Time to first byte. Don't have a. I've never really measured that anymore. Mostly just measure Lighthouse metrics. Actually I don't know a good tool for that measurement.
Is New Relic better, like those kind of tools in the platform?
It might be, but I don't know what's included in Pingdom's. Are you using like the real user monitoring from Pingdom?
Was it a question to me or to the question?
It was a question to Jacob. Jacob.
Yeah. Azure App Insights.
All right. Yeah, I don't have any good suggestion actually.
Does a hosting provider play a role in this? Maybe in e-commerce, it's more about the ecosystem, like the entire tech stack. If you're hosting on your own, yes, of course, it plays a role. If you're using, like, if you're running a website on Shopify or Salesforce or Adobe Cloud, those kind of platforms, you're sort of benefiting from the entire ecosystem, not just the hosting provider.
Yeah, as a comment for not measuring time to first byte, like it will be included in most of the metrics in Lighthouse anyway. I mean, it's just not a metric on its own, but it will affect your score, of course.
Yeah.
But it's like calculated into something that means value to a user, which is like, when do you render your page, rather than when are my resources finished.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is a super interesting conversation. If we get new insights, maybe we'll do a 3.0.
Yeah.
But at least we'll publish the next top list in a month, hopefully with new companies at the top. And I would like to see more smaller e-commerce websites in the top 20. We have a ongoing conversation whether there should be a revenue limit to be on the list, but I don't. Yeah, I'm leaning against that. I would like to see small companies at the top of that list. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm happy with today. Any parting words, Daniel?
Not really. Performance is fun.
It is what it is. Okay, I also regret to inform you that we actually messed up the first part of the recording, so this probably will not be available online afterwards, so off air. So thank you for participating, and we'll see you around for the next session. Bye.